So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Joyce Garnes, interim dean, for those of you who didn't recognize me. Sorry, I'm just pointing at Susan here. For a brief moment, didn't recognize the woman in the leopard outfit. So I'm really pleased that you came today, and there was a huge crowd this morning as well to come to listen to Matt Pelish's presentation of redefining the academic library, work that was done by the Education Advisory Board, which is helping us to rethink how libraries operate and how we will look at libraries going forward. Some very intriguing ideas, some inspiring ideas, some challenging ideas, and we don't have to do them all. I mean, I was saying to Matt earlier, these are examples from a whole multitude of institutions. Not any one institution has adopted all the practices, and we have to find something that makes sense for us here. But I have worked with this particular report in the past in strategic planning and reporting, and looking at the continuum of change. And when you have certain targets, you can see over time how they do change. So it's a wonderful vehicle to work with, and I'm sure you're going to be intrigued and excited and challenged as I have been. And this morning I learned some new things and made some notes and so on. And there was a question this morning that the slides and access to the report and so on will be made available to everyone so you can follow up. And now we're very fortunate and honored to have the provost, Jonathan Rickett, with us to say a few welcoming words to launch this afternoon's event.
Very good. Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon, everybody. And it seems like just a couple hours ago I was here.
I forgot to thank the members of the group who organized this, but Jonathan,
No,
sorry, I'm embarrassed because there's been so much work that's gone on in organizing this. And this morning, I neglected to mention Steph, who's sitting right in the corner there, but it's also Mark and Jeff. Is that in the room? Oh, of course you are. Sorry. And then Emma and Kelly as well, part of the group that helped bring today to fruition. So I want to thank you all, and I think all of us should thank that particular group for making it happen. So Emma and Kelly, there you go. Yes. Okay.
Absolutely. Well, and I was just saying, it's just a couple hours ago I was here for the kickoff of the morning session, and we had a full room this morning as well, and we're very appreciative of Matt joining us and Ashley from Education Advisory Board to basically have this workshop and this presentation and this discussion session twice today. And really the goal is to be able to have as many faculty and staff in the library and others across campus, and we have some other faculty and staff from across campus here as well. And it's all part of getting the discussion going about the future of the library and where we're going. I want to say a couple words about the Education Advisory Board. This is an organization that you may not have worked with before in the past, but I certainly have, and Iowa State certainly has in a lot of different ways. The Education Advisory Board basically serves scores of major research universities across the country. We are a member of it, and pretty much a who's who list of universities are also partners in the Education Advisory Board. And what they will do is they will conduct studies and reports to help inform the client universities. And we work with them on the academic affairs side of the university to be able to find out what is going on at other universities. I mean, one of the ways that you can find out what's happening in academic libraries around the country is you can go visit a whole bunch of libraries, conduct surveys with each one, talk to them, and then come back and write a report, or you can ask the Education Advisory Board to do it for you. And that's exactly what they did. So today we're actually benefiting from something that is actually a priority of many major research universities like ours, to learn more and understand the changing landscape facing academic libraries, and to be able to get all of that in a very concise, kind of intense form. So Matt, it's good to see you again, and Matt and I have worked together in the past, and we're very, very glad to have him sharing the expertise from this particular study of the EAB. Because the issues that are facing academic libraries are ones that everybody is facing. right? The digital landscape is changing. You know, cost of acquisitions for serials is going up at a high rate. You know, space issues, you know, resource issues, all of these things that are pressures for us here in our library are exactly the same that other universities are facing. So what we want to be able to do is we want to learn, you know, be able to think about those issues strategically, learn what's worked and what hasn't worked at other institutions, and then use it to prompt our own discussion. So Matt is not parachuting in here with a report that's telling us what to do. Okay, that is not what's happening today. But what he is doing is he's going to come out, he's going to throw a bunch of stuff out and say, these are the issues, we should all be thinking about it. And so my goal and my charge to you is to take what's discussed today and use it to start informing discussions and planning that we're going to have here in the library. And this should be a very interactive session, and this is not the last time that you are going to talk about the issues facing the library and how we move forward. This is the beginning of that process. And so I think it's going to be very exciting. I think you're going to learn some things, and I think it's also going to spark, you know, some thoughts that you might have about how we can continue to provide great service in the library and what we do to move to the next level. And all of these changes that are facing academic libraries, you know, the reality is if we don't respond to them, and if we don't change and we don't adapt, then you just fall behind because everybody else is out there in the competition. And so we want to be out there as well, adopting the best practices and making sure that we end up doing exactly what we want to do, and that is to provide just the very best service to students and the very best service to faculty and staff researchers around campus. So I'm really looking forward to this, and this is going to kick off an activity that you will have this year in the library to do planning, to do strategic planning for the library, and that's a charge that I'm giving you, and it's a charge that I've given Joyce and her leadership team, is to come up with a plan, a strategic plan for moving the library forward, and then this year begin to take some of the natural, kind of logical, low-hanging fruit kind of steps to start implementing that plan. So we have extremely high expectations for Matt's presentation today. I know he's up to the challenge. He's going to do a great job, and I want to thank you for coming to this session. You know, this is an investment in the library and the future of the library. To have you all here and have your colleagues here earlier this morning, it's an investment in the library to have EAB coming on in, and this is all with a view toward taking the library really to the next level. So thank you very much for coming, and Matt, I'm going to stick around and listen to a little bit of your talk as well. So thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Nothing, right? Wow, that's exhausting right off the bat. But no, wait, something. I always do that little bit of afternoon joke of like nobody says hi, and of course I'm obviously very intimidating because nobody has decided to come up here at all. It must be just that challenging. It's always very funny when you teach or you do presentations. There's certain hours that you love to present, right? There's usually from like 10 till 12, which we did earlier this morning, which is usually getting into the morning and people are pretty upbeat and starting the day and lots of responses. And then there's around the 1 o'clock hour and the 2 o'clock hour, which is after lunch and getting the afternoon. It's usually a quiet time. Some people call it the speaker or teacher death hour, right, where there's no responses. So I'm going to try throughout the session that we do, the next hour or so, to get some questions, to get some great dialogue going. I know we've got this weird pillar thing going here, so I'm going to try to walk back and forth. I made the joke earlier this morning, and I feel very repetitive when you do things twice in one day and you're doing the same presentation. Those of you who were in the early morning session, I apologize because the jokes are the same. They don't get better. And I'm still going to tell the same stories in a lot of ways. But my first time at Fenway Park, I was talking to Jeff about the Red Sox. I'm a big baseball fan. I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and was going to Fenway for the first time. Really excited about it. Fenway, old baseball park. If any of you have ever been to Fenway, got a couple miles and things. It is my favorite baseball park, and I'm a Phillies fan by birth, but that's my favorite park, not my second favorite team. And I went to go to my first baseball game at Fenway Park. I was very excited about it. And Fenway has a lot of pillars and a lot of different seats. And what happens is you can buy tickets behind the pillars, and they're the restricted view seats in Fenway Park. So me not knowing anything about this, having no clue, the first tickets I bought at Fenway were restricted view seats. And I get to my seat and I find it, and I'm sitting down right behind a pillar, literally this giant green pillar. And I spent the whole baseball game like this, kind of like leaning around, leaning into people next to me. So I will do my absolute best to walk around a little bit more and come over and say hello to everybody. But if you need to move, and there's lots of seats up front, we've got an unobstructed view, right up here. You can all move up and take that. So, what we're going to talk about today is a study we did at EAB called Redefining the Academic Library. And I want to give a little bit of an intro to that, because as Jonathan said, I'm not coming in here today to tell you what to do. I'm not laying out the roadmap, the playbook, the dictate of what the library should look like or what we should be talking about. I want to give you an overview of what we heard in the process of doing a research study. The thing we do on a regular basis, how EAB research comes about, we say it's very organic in nature. Meaning every year on this ongoing basis, we profile, we survey university communities, provosts, CEOs, faculty, presidents, deans, directors, everybody, to find out what are the big issues that you're dealing with. And the phrase we use, the thing that is the core of our research, is the keep you up at night issues. Right? And let that sink in, because those are the things that literally we want to get to. What are you losing sleep over? And about 3 years ago, when this research project came about, we were profiling provosts, and the library was the #1 topic that came out of our survey and our results. That was interesting. This is the first time the library had always come up. There's always things that are perennial topics. You've got online education, you've got enrollment management, you've got certain things, but this was the first time libraries came up. And so as researchers, we undertook this in a very interesting way. We went back and we started to talk to provosts and say, okay, why? Why is it the library now? And they couldn't tell us. What happened right away is they said, you need to go talk to my dean, you need to go talk to my director of the library. They know what's going on. I feel like there's something going on, but you need to go talk to them to figure out what's going on. And that's what we did. We started to have all these conversations about what was going on. And there was this feeling that there was a lot of change going on in the library. There was a point where there was all these new models, there were all these new options, all these new opportunities with technology and information systems. We started to get a sense of what were some of those challenges, what were some of those changes that were going on. Now again, this is the process that we did to get into this research. It's not me coming in and telling you that this is what we think, or an ivory tower approach. This is what we really heard through the conversations we had, through the innovative practices we were trying to identify. And this is meant to be a session where it's idea sharing. I'm going to present a lot of different things. I'm going to talk about a lot of different trends that we uncovered. But I'd love to hear from you all. I'd love to hear, what do you think about this? I'd love to hear questions about how you see this at Iowa State. How have you addressed some of these challenges? Are they things you've already taken care of? Are there things you're well advanced on? Are there things you never do? I'd love this to be much more of a discussion than me just standing up here for the next hour or so. I'm originally from Philly, that's hence the Phillies fan. And I can talk really fast for a very long period of time, just by nature. But I don't want to do that today. I would much rather hear from you all. And so I'll pose some questions as we go. But if you have questions, you have thoughts, just raise your hand and let me know. I'd love to hear these things as we go. Sound good to everybody? I know after lunch, there is coffee back there. If anybody needs that kick of caffeine or something, or sugar, I think there's cookies too. This is a little bit of how I'm going to walk through some of the research today. This is a little roadmap for our discussion. I'm going to talk first about transformational change in the information landscape. And what that means, what we're going to discuss, are what are some of the driving agents of change? What have we seen as some of the major themes as we did this research? We moved from a case of just in case to just in time. Talking more about services that are delivered to patrons when they need to use them, as opposed to just holding things in case somebody needs to use them within the library. And that's actually, we're going to talk about 4 distinct areas. We're going to talk about books, we're going to talk about journals, space, and staffing. Those 4 major areas that came up that people told us they were looking to figure out what was going on with the library, what were some of the changes. So we'll just give a little bit of an overview of each of these as we go in. And again, as Jonathan said, this is not the be-all, end-all. Happy to send out all of the information, all the slides, the full research study to everybody, so you can take this afterwards and digest and think a little bit more about it. I start with this. This was where we started our research, because I'm a researcher of higher education. I'm not an expert on libraries. I don't have a Master of Library Science degree. I do a lot of research on different aspects of colleges and universities. And so when the topic of libraries came up, it was about going out and saying, okay, what does the industry say? What are we hearing from librarians? What can we get into? And this was one that I uncovered. And this is the Tioga Forum. This is a community of associate university librarians, associate library deans. And they put out these provocative statements. And they are intentionally meant to be provocative. These are not, definitive statements about what's going on, but them sort of challenging what's taking place in the library. And what we found are they had these proceeded by 2015. We're getting pretty close to this, is what we're saying. But by 2015, our users will meet more than 90% of their information needs from sources that are not directly connected to the library. By 2015, successful libraries will be those that have managed to turn over the majority of their staff or reassign staff to different roles within the library. By 2015, most library space will be taken over by functions that have nothing to do with library collections or services. These were interesting thoughts for us, for me, when I was thinking about this research. But these are, come on, this is a transformational change going on. This would be different than what we had always thought about in terms of libraries. And that was what we started to realize. There was something going on. There was some change taking place that preceded these types of comments. But these were the extreme, provocative statements. But what else was going on? What would have people start to make this type of statement? Well, we realized there were some of those driving agents going on, the drivers of change. We facetiously called this the 4 Horsemen of the Library Apocalypse. And I did not come up with that title, and I don't claim credit for it at all. It was actually an article written by a historian at Princeton, PhD, tenured faculty member, who wrote an article, Apocalypse in the Stacks, the Research Library in the Age of Google, and laid out this idea of the 4 Horsemen of the Library Apocalypse. Now, I would say these are the driving agents of change, or the things that are changing within the library space. In one case, you have unsustainable costs. And people would often point to the rising cost of journals, the rising cost of resources within the library. At the same time, we don't necessarily see a lot of resources coming to the library in terms of financial funding. So we're trying to do more with less, and costs continue to rise. It's an operation we can continue to sustain. Let's talk about viable alternatives. And these are organizations, most notably one I'll pull out there is Google, obviously, that now offer options for how you can search for information, how you can get access to information. And there's questions about how viable these would be, and what some of the challenges are, sort of things that are making hurdles behind these. But you have a lot of organizations coming about now that dwarf the size of a typical academic library. We'll talk about declining usage. In some cases here we're talking about some traditional library services. We've got circulation reference services that we've seen statistically in decline. But at the same time, that has moved towards new patron demand. It's not saying that people aren't coming to the library as much. It's saying that we heard in conversations that the library is actually more active than ever before. That we have this very vibrant academic space on campus that students, that faculty, that constituents are coming to. But they're expecting new things. They're expecting 24/7 access. They're expecting digital access. They're expecting the cafe approach to the library. They're expecting communal space and collaborative space and study space and all these different demands that are being placed on a library. Can we continue to do that? Can we continue to operate and provide those services that are being asked for? These would be the 4 primary things that come up most in our conversations. But I would love to pose to you all the questions. Other things that you might see on the horizon, or things that you think have been a part of the change conversation, or that have been driving the dialogue on campuses about the state of the library, or what might take place within the library. I'd love to hear that from you, your thoughts on this.
Some researchers are actually participating more in efforts like digital repository, open access, things like that, which can help offset some of the unsustainable.
Very well. And we'll talk about some of those. Sometimes we're just good. We made an exhaustive list with 4 things. It's pretty good, right? Let's dive into each one of these a little bit and talk about them and show you what we started to hear in our conversations that people were talking about and getting through a little bit of this. And we'll start with that issue of unsustainable costs in a lot of this. Say that when we look at the changes, when we look at the challenges and costs and resources of the library, we started to hear this interesting comment that nobody was immune to what was going on. And the one that was pulled out for us was Harvard's library. So one of the largest, best resource libraries in the country, in the world, was not immune to some of the changes taking place in some of the resource constraints. Now, Harvard's got more than 16 million physical volumes, more than 1,200 full-time library employees. Perhaps my favorite one right down there at the bottom, I'm sure you're all thinking, $160 million in annual operating expenses. That's wouldn't everybody love to have $160 million? General nods, people say, yeah, I would love to work with that budget. But we think about Harvard. Harvard had a task force that started to look at the libraries a little bit differently. And they put out this report and they had this great quote that the libraries can no longer harbor delusions of being a completely comprehensive collection. So that most libraries realistically gave up on being a completely comprehensive collection quite a long time ago, getting to the reality. Harvard held out a little bit longer, thinking they could actually do this. But they've now even moved to a model where they're saying it's actually about a model that ensures access to, not necessarily ownership of, scholarly materials needed by faculty, students, and other library users now and in the future. This is the change. That's transformational. That's very different. It's not just about having the things there physically, but access to them on different ways. Now we realize, of course, in the challenge of the libraries is how do we measure success? How do we measure quality of a library, or what a library is doing? And how are those things measured, reported, discussed? There were a lot of things that people always said. We had traditional metrics that were very quantitative in nature, the things you see over on the left-hand side of this, where we're looking at number of volumes held, serial titles, expenditures, gate count, things that were very quantitative that would say this is how we measure the quality of the library. course of conversations with deans and directors, they say, well, we're now being measured by some new ways, and some new metrics about that value proposition of what we're providing. These are very qualitative in nature. They're very different. We're talking about impact on student enrollment, retention, and graduation, impact on student learning, contribution to research productivity of the institution, impact on grant proposals and funding, supporting teaching and learning of the institution. Things that you can't necessarily measure as easily. By which the library is being held up saying, this is what we're going to work on, this is what we're going to be held accountable to. And there's this great quote by Megan Oakley from a work here she did on the value of academic libraries, where she says that all librarians can no longer rely on their stakeholders' belief in their importance, rather they must demonstrate their value. This question of being accountable to stakeholders, students, faculty, people using the services of the library, looking for what the end results are going to be. Now, the issue we heard a lot, though, too, is that we don't know exactly which metrics we're going to use. When it's accreditors or when people are coming in to talk about the library, we're thinking about strategic planning. When we don't have a clear idea of what our metrics are, we can't really work towards them. We can't necessarily track them or report on them. We're stuck in between this. We have an era where sometimes we would look at the quantitative measures, sometimes the qualitative. How do we balance those? What does the quality start to look like? That adds a lot of challenges when thinking about the future of the library. Now, this gets us to a little bit of our first driver of change here that we're discussing. That role of the unsustainable costs. Broken out here over on the left-hand side, this is from the 124 members of the ARL libraries. And what we have here in terms of the actual growth rate, in terms of the expenditures we have for monographs and serial expenditures. And on the bottom, that sort of dark blue line, you've got basically your monographs that rose relatively the same rate as inflation, or the consumer price index, pretty much along the same lines. But your serial expenditures, you're at about 7%. If you look at the straight line growth of the missiles. You say when we're talking about those journals, we're talking about this. We can't continue to pay for that. We can't continue to accommodate those resource requests. But we still need to have access to those resources, because people are still expecting us to provide access to those, even though the costs have continued to rise and rise and rise. And when we actually looked at the share of the library budget that was going towards these different pieces, you see that serials have continued to rise and increase in the percentage of the budget that actually goes towards serials, while pretty much every other aspect of the library budget has gone down across the same time period. We have huge questions about how we spend those resources, and are there better ways that we would reallocate them? The general feeling from almost everybody, and this is across higher education, is that we're probably not getting more money. We're probably not going to be better financed than we are right now. We're trying to figure out how do we do more with what we currently have. And given this current rate, given what's going on, we don't necessarily see that this is a very optimistic situation to be sitting in. So how do we get around this a little bit? Now, when we got into those issues of serials, we get into the issues of journals, we started to talk to librarians and deans and directors and everybody about what was the challenge here? Why did these costs rise so much? When you look at some of the other comparisons of things going down. And I started to talk about the issues of publishers, really. Of course, talking about the prices of these journals, these big deal subscriptions, continue to rise at a rate faster than inflation. And of course, you have the bundled deals, so you can't cancel one individual title or you lose access to a lot of other things. So you have sort of the cable package approach to your journals and your subscriptions, where you don't necessarily want all of them, but you're getting all of them, paying for all of them, because you have access to one of that premium pieces that come out of this. We have the issue of course, the copyright challenge. And we heard a lot of people saying, well, our faculty are the ones doing the research, our faculty are the ones doing the peer review. They're doing all the work, and then they're handing over the journal article and the copyright to the publisher who sells it back to us, even though we provide a lot of the support and the work that goes behind us, and we have to continue to buy it, because of course we have to continue to provide access to that for our faculty and our students and other people. And that seems like, again, not the right business model if we were doing this. We can just give away something for free and then buy it back. They'd always ask, would there be a nonprofit model? Right? Could we find that open access repository? Can we find ways to do web publishing and other things that don't require us to necessarily buy these journal subscriptions? And that would be the sort of ideal model. Could we find that open access approach to journals? Now, of course, in being objective, we went back and we talked to the publishers. We got on the phone, we went to ask them the exact same questions. And I think they put us on the phone with their PR people, because they were really, really good at sort of crafting that message about what was going on here. But what they told us is the things we have over here on the right-hand side. So the research output of faculty and institutions has just continued to increase, and we're trying to provide access to that. At the same time, if you look at the cost per article download, it's actually gone down over the same time. So it's cheaper per article if you're looking at the groups of things. You have wider access through those bundles at a discount for wider access to all the journals that you have there. The transition, the movement towards e-journals, digital access to information, was a significant investment on their part. And they took the shoulder and the brunt of what it would cost to have that digital access to this information. So they're just sort of passing that along to the customer in the same way. And the last thing they said is they would be open to open access models. They would certainly think about them if they could continue to recuperate and recover their costs. Okay? That was the argument that we got. Now, as soon as we started to hear a little bit of that, we were a little skeptical. Certainly when we talked to provosts and library directors and deans, they were a little skeptical of this kind of model because you still have a publisher who's based upon a profit model. Right? They're still looking at the end of the day of how they're going to generate revenues from the selling of publishing and all these pieces. But this was at least kind of, here were the two sides of the story we started to hear in the publishing. Yes, sir?
Did publishers say anything about what value they added to along in the process? And let me give you an example.
Sure.
Earlier in the report, earlier in this page, we talked about some professors wanted to be published in this.
Sure.
And for a variety of reasons, you can guess at those. Some professors, some not. But is it a case where they, the prestigious journal, or something about that journal, just branding, or something about it, the way they conduct the refereeing the papers and everything else, so that this is the gold standard for the industry, and it's what we want to keep, that would be lost in one of these models?
It did come up, their idea of the quality journals, these gold star journals, that are obviously a part of the faculty promotion and tenure process as well. You're looking at faculty promoting these very high quality journals that go into that. The basic argument we heard is, well, these are quality, we're sort of making we are the gatekeepers of quality, making sure that only the best of the best is what's put in these journal articles. That's what you're getting. But at the cost of it would be the backside argument. And they didn't play that up as much as you would think, because of a lot of the pushback from people about the faculty model and how this looks, and why can't faculty who are doing great research publish it in a more open way that more people have access to it, than having to pay for all of that in the subsidy model. So we heard a little bit of it, but more so this kind of PR argument, I would say, came out of us. Yeah.
Did you ever ask them what the net profit was in any given year? Or?
Not willing to share that.
No. And the fact that the fact that
Nor
there
could we
isn't,
quote them by name, which we agreed not to do. So we have a general, here's what we heard from them, the larger publishers, but we're not allowed to quote publishers by name.
the reason they can publish these wonderful articles is because people peer review for free.
It's a great business model, isn't it? You get free
Yeah.
information and you sell it to somebody who did it in the first place. Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah.
I can say from the faculty perspective that, first of all, these e-journal systems that they invested so much in are terrible. They make reviewing and being an editor a real pain. And it's better than the old paper system, but it is very primitive, so that level of investment is not what they're claiming. And second, yes, from the faculty perspective, you need to publish in the prestigious journals. Prestigiousness doesn't change quickly. So sometimes open access, relatively low-cost journals emerge, but that takes a long time. And in the meantime, the publishers see the name of the journals they're affiliated with, or they own, as an asset. And they're basically trying to use that to maintain their business model. And you get especially a lot of older professors who see open access as, well, if the journal's open access, well, it must be like all these fake journals that you keep seeing cropping up every few minutes. And so it's difficult to tell the difference between those that really have a rigorous review process and those that are paper-based.
I think it's very interesting you talk about I would say the power of prestige. The prestige is huge in higher education as a whole. We all could know this. The Harvard, the Yale, the Princeton. You say the names of institutions that you just know are prestigious and must be quality. It gets to me the MOOC phenomenon as it came out over the past few years. That you have these massive open online courses where courseware you had access to and everybody was doing it, and it was assumed that it was quality because of where it was coming from. Right? As long as it came from MIT and Caltech and Stanford and Princeton, we assumed that it would be quality education. We weren't always getting into, well, could there be a model for this that still assumes quality and still looks at how we're looking at outcomes and everything else and how we measure this. But there's the prestige factor that is always a part of higher education culture. And I think it always will be. It's not going to change rapidly or quickly. There's always going to be that issue. Oh, yeah.
2 points actually about the value added as a university librarian dean. That's the argument the publishers give to us, and I'm sure people in this room have heard that they add value to it. It's interesting it didn't come out in your interaction with them. But it's actually the open access. I want to have a promo, and perhaps someone else in the room can give more details, but the library will be hosting a panel during Open Access Week, and that will be a wonderful opportunity to talk about many of these issues which are still evolving.
What are the time dates?
Yeah, Tuesday, October 21st at 6:30 p.m. in the Memorial Union. Thanks, Joyce.
And we're orange. Orange is the color of open access.
I didn't know that either. Well done. Anybody have any other plugs? We can do plugs today. We have other things. I'm happy to. That's good. Okay. The second, if we keep moving through those and think about what was driving change and what we heard about in these conversations, would be that alternative approach, or the viable alternatives that were available. Starting to chart out here is the different organizations that have emerged that provide access to information. Look at some of these that we're looking at. Google scanned more than 30 million books. You've got Amazon has millions of print titles, lots of ebook titles and digital information available. The Hathi Trust, a consortium of academic libraries, other libraries of digital scans, has more than 10 million ebook titles. There are 4.4 million articles in English on Wikipedia. We bring up these because this is a lot of places where your students are starting their searches for information that we'll talk about later, a little bit of what that looks like. But you see the sheer scale of these organizations, these institutions, that just dwarf the scale of a library and provide different access. Also the question, if they have all this information, what role does the library play? What bar does the library have to hit in terms of providing access to different information? Now there are, of course, limitations and questions of quality on all of these different things, and copyright limitations and all this. But it gets us to an interesting answer about who's providing information, who's providing access to it, and at what scale. And I always play and love the Google mission statement as a thought experiment. Think about Google's mission, laid down here, is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, not that they have, but they're certainly making a lot of progress and a lot of steps and strides in that direction. And it calls into question, okay, what is the bar that a library is now supposed to hit? We're competing with somebody like that who's trying to accomplish that. What does that mean for us? What does the future of a library hold in terms of this environment? And when we go to that, we think about something like Google that has this great story. This is one of my favorite stories that came out in the process of this research that someone told us. It came from Michigan, where Michigan actually is the alma mater of Larry Page. Larry Page, one of the founders of Google, one of the huge drivers behind the book scanning initiative that they started in the first place. And Larry Page, he goes to the University of Michigan, he goes to the library there, and I can't imagine what people were thinking when Larry Page just shows up on campus and is like, I want to go talk to the librarian. I want to go to the library and I want to see what's going on there, because this is somebody who's very innovative, very forward-thinking. What is he doing? And he goes back and he asks the library, he says, how long would it take you to scan all 7 million volumes that you have here? In that meeting with Larry Page, they said to him, Larry, it would take us 1,000 years to do that. Now, Larry Page, founder of Google, says, I think I can do it faster. And he goes back, and sure enough, 6 years later, Google has scanned 7 million books, 7 million volumes. Now, we've seen, obviously, Google has continued the book scanning initiative. They've pulled together this repository of digitized books and information that they're trying to get everybody access to and want to resource that information. I think this just sends an interesting message, an interesting story about that we realize the role of a nonprofit organization in a college and university library providing access and information, that it's often this nimble, well-resourced, financially viable institution that's pushing forward very quickly and doing a lot of this work, but they see a business model behind it, right? Google's publicly traded. They're a for-profit. They're trying to figure out a business model for information as well, which again is what we say the devil's bargain over on the right-hand side. When we talk to people, they say, it's great that we can think about access to information on this massive scale that Google could provide, and they can do all of this great work. That would be great for us, for our students, for our patrons. At the same time, it's a for-profit corporation. They have control over all that information, and they're looking for a business model to sell it. Is that really the right model for us? Is that going to have a benefit in the long term as we think about it? So there's a challenge there and a trade-off. What is the benefit of this kind of model? But interesting to think about those kinds of organizations plugging ahead and pushing forward about information. Which turned us to those types of models, those types of businesses that were built upon a physical distribution of content, and how that whole organization, how that whole industry evolved. Because if we go back to, say, the local distribution models in the 1990s, you've got Borders, you've got Blockbuster Video, you've got Tower Records. If you wanted to go get a book, you wanted to go get a movie, you wanted to go get a piece of music, you would physically go to the location, to one of their retail outlets or one of their retail stores. You would browse through what was available, whatever it might be, the book, the movie. You might stumble upon something you've never seen before. You would hope they had in stock what you might have gone there to get in the first place, if they actually had it. You're hoping for that point. What we start to see is the emergence of the digital models with the web, where web sales start to take over. And you have organizations like Amazon, Netflix, iTunes, that come to dominate in each one of those individual categories. But they're providing a different kind of access, a different shopping experience. You have the Borders, the Blockbuster Video, the Tower Records of the world go into bankruptcy and no longer exist. People would tell us a lot of things, and this is a great model because it opens up access on a scale we've never seen before. That long tail, the ability to go and search for information that we could have never found because no one of these locations or one of these organizations could have kept all of that in stock. for us to find, but now we can go search for it. We can see that information, we can order it very quickly and have it delivered to us in a day if we want to. Or if the drone system from Amazon takes off, you can have, what, 30 minutes? Is that what the goal of the drone system is? Have you seen this? Where Amazon's going to deliver your packages to your doorstep via drone. In 30 minutes, you could potentially have something that was a long piece of information. Now we're even at a new step here. And again, the thing I always go back to is that people always say, well, I used to really love browsing the bookstore. I used to love browsing the music store and finding something randomly that I never thought about before. And I'm going to say I'm one of those people as well. I was an English major. I love bookstores. I have tons of books. My wife is making me slowly get rid of them and take them off the shelves. But at the same time, I really love browsing and doing a lot of that. But I'll also say that these new organizations, the Amazons, the Netflix, the iTunes, have now replaced that serendipitous discovery with a sophisticated algorithm. Right? It's going to tell you, hey, based upon your search for this and your purchase of this and your past purchases of this, you might be interested in these 10 other things that you never even thought about or would ever search or ever come across. That's an interesting way to start pushing information. It's the joke, and I've read this article before that I think is very interesting, where Target comes out and there's an article that says, Target knows your wife is pregnant before you do. Based upon purchasing behavior and search behavior and big data, where they're pulling all of that information together and trying to get a sense of the end user or customer, obviously, in this sense, and how you can start to provide that information. That's all moved into what we have now, the cloud-based models. Where not only do you expect to be able to search and find pretty much anything that's available out there anywhere, but now we have people who expect that I can go and I can search for it, I can find it, I can purchase it, I can download it, I can store it and have access to it all the time from any device from anywhere. Because I'm constantly connected to my cloud, my Box account, my whatever it is, and I can download it to my smartphone, my tablet, my PC, whatever it might be, at any time. That's the new consumer mentality. That's the new student on campus. That's the bar that's now being set for access to information. That you can get it anywhere at any time for anything you're ever looking for. Which got us to this interesting quote. This is from Dennis Dillon. He's a retired librarian from the UT Austin Libraries. He's worked in libraries his whole life. And he has this great quote that I thought just summed up that situation, summed up that scenario. And sort of closing up the office, I can picture him talking to you, leaving us with this. The new consumer utopia of instantly available digital books is leaving the library behind as a relic of a bygone age, when users were not self-sufficient, when the information in a book, the information from a book a user wanted was not simply a click away. It's also that question of what do people expect? What are we going to have to deliver? What is going to be the expectations of information? It gets us to our third piece of this. The third change agent, what's really driving some of these conversations? We'd say declining usage. And like I said, this is for some traditional services that the library had offered. In one case here, we're talking about search for information. That's an interesting way to think about references or requests that we have. And this was an interesting study. It was done by OCLC, questioning where do students start their search for information. Now, the vast majority of student responses fall right in that search engine, which I think makes a lot of sense. And I don't think anyone's ever shocked by Google or Yahoo or Bing or whatever search engine that students are using to go look for information. It calls to question how much information literacy they have about the search results that come out of those search engines. But at the same time, that's where the start takes place. Wikipedia is pulling in the number 2 spot with 7%. Right? That's where you go in this Wikipedia. It's obviously got to be a good resource. That's what students are saying. But even then, my favorite is definitely number 3. We can see this, I hope. This is the social networking site that pulls in the number 3 spot. It's only 2%, but it's still the number 3 spot on where students are starting. Meaning that students are going to Facebook, they're going to Twitter. That's where they're going to get information from their peers and start that search for information or search for research. That is fascinating to me. I hope you all think about that as well. And of course, the kind of interest, the library website's pulling in 0% from their study and research study. Now, I always say that this is where students start their search for information. This is not necessarily where they end their search. This is not saying they don't use library resources. This is where their mind goes when they think about where they're going to get access or where they should start looking for things. And it may eventually turn into the library resource, or may eventually turn to the right place. But this is where the mentality starts in the process. I saw a couple hands go.
Do you know if they differentiate between undergrad and grad students?
Oh, in this study, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure these are undergrads, but I have to go back and look if it was broken out in those two senses. My guess is undergrads, but I'm not quite sure. The other side over on the right is where faculty start their search for information. In this case, we're moving from 2003 to 2009, and I'm looking at the percentage and the change in the same study that they did. Where specific electronic research resource is moving from 37 to 47%. Search engines, again, jumping up more than 10%. The online library catalog, the library building, dropping down by 10% and 9% respectively there. So not necessarily the library resources. Now, the interesting thing apart about this is when you think about faculty, this piece on the top, that electronic research resource, is probably provided by the library. very, very likely it's provided by the library. But when we talked to faculty about those and we got into those conversations, we heard a lot that they didn't always necessarily associate those with the library as being the ones who provide those. And they would often tell us, well, if I can get access to it in some other way, through a professional association or through a password and a login I had from somewhere else, and I can get in and access some of these, I'm not really worried about continually fighting for the resources of the library to have access to this. I don't think of the library as the one providing that, even though it is where a lot of those searches start, where a lot of that information is done. Now we talk about traditional library services in decline. We have here circulation and reference requests. Now we looked across all different types of institutions, from community colleges to doctoral institutions, that we saw double-digit declines across every segment of those types of institutions. And we're looking from 1998 to 2008 from ACRL study that was looking at this, where you're seeing those traditional services being requested and being used less and less on campus. Now I'd love to turn over to you. I asked a little bit from the first group this morning of what you thought about this at Iowa State, or what you thought this might look like in terms of traditional circulation and reference requests. If you think those numbers, and I've been to a lot of libraries where people said, you know, our numbers are actually increasing. Holding pretty steady is what we've always been. We haven't seen these same declines as we've seen on a national scale. I'd love to hear from you of your thoughts or perspectives. Is this accurate here as well, or do you see a different thing going on?
I think there was that big jump down.
Okay.
From year to year, it's a small decrease. I think there was a big jump. If you would compare our statistics of 98 to 2008, you'd probably see
I
that.
see a drop in that.
But some of it is single digits now.
Okay.
Well, I remember about 30 years ago, they were always going to say, oh, computers, they're going to, wipe us out of our jobs and everything. But I've been working, have been working in the library alone. And we actually have just about managed to get ourselves to a point where the automation has taken over much of what we do.
Okay.
And then again, with all the electronic resources that everybody has, also has made interlibrary learning decline seriously.
Okay. Sure.
It would be interesting to compare these with gate count, because I know I worked at Boston College, and their gate count had exploded, but I'm not sure that that was necessarily reflected in these things, but sort of gets to the point about using the libraries in ways that are not related to collections or.
You're right, and most people say we look at gate count. Some people will track reshelving as well. It's often a metric of our people using the resources in the library and just leaving it there and having them used in the space. That is more of what we think happens. If we look at gate count, if we look at utilization of the space, it's probably one of the most active places on campus now, more than ever before. But the demands of the patrons of what they're looking for, and our fourth driver change makes the tenth. What does that space have to be now? What are people looking for? What are students and faculty and other patrons looking for from that space? In this case, we're looking at here. This is Seattle University. This is just one example, literally, of dozens of these that we've seen of that learning commons model for the library space. What you have here, this is the new library, the McGoldrick Learning Commons. The new libraries are in the background piece, where they still have traditional libraries and physical volumes and things. But our conversations with them and a lot of institutions, the activity, the action is taking place up in this new space. It's very innovative in terms of design. It's designed for media resources for students. There's reading rooms, there's media development labs, there's literally the whole learning commons itself that's designed around collaborative space and group study work and all the modular aspects of this that can be moved around very quickly. And of course they have the Connection Cafe. They've got the coffee shop in there as well. You don't even have to leave the library to go get refreshments or coffee or whatever it might be you would need. This one here that I really thought was interesting, the Learning Commons at Seattle University has what's called an e-lobby. Anybody know what an e-lobby is? No? No one? Neither did I. And neither when I talked to Isaiah Crawford, he's the provost there. I was like, Isaiah, what is an e-lobby? His response, I have no idea. But his response was very interesting. He said, I have no idea, but we found that if we put E or I in front of something, that students find it to be more innovative and technical and very interesting. He's like, so we created an e-lobby. And he's like, there's lots of computers, there's connectivity, it's all there. But we just call it the e-lobby, and now it's an exciting lobby. We go to But this is more of what we're starting to see. This is the academic heart of the institution. That's what the demand for this kind of space is. That people say this is busy on a Friday night. We're going to have everybody come together. We have all of our academic resources in one place. Our counseling centers, our writing centers, our tutoring centers, our math centers, everything is all in this one building that students can go to for their academics. And they also said the good point of this for Seattle and others is when we're trying to raise money for this, we're trying to get money and resources from a capital campaign or from donors and all that, we actually think this is a really easy way to do it, because when you say you're trying to raise funds for the academic part of the institution that's going to contribute directly to student learning and outcomes and research, they found it was much easier to raise funds for this. And got a lot of donors who wanted to have their name associated with this great, vibrant, new student learning space on campus. And when they would go to them for other things, to have different electronic resources or get other resources from the library, they were not getting quite the same response as when they put a tag on it like this, for that part of the institution. That's very different. That shows the innovative nature of the space. What this gets us to, when we have all these different things, these drivers, the change agents, things taking place, are questions of how do we resource all of this? We look at the traditional core of the library, and now the emergence of all the new things that people are asking for and expecting from libraries and from information systems and services. On-site services, we have instructional support for faculty and others, we've got web services, research support, all of the things that are coming to be expected of a library, as a space, as an institution, as an organization in terms of service. And the question is, how do we resource all this? When we're looking at the amount of resources we have available, what do we do and what don't we do? What are the trade-offs? What are the strategic plans going to tell us to do? How are we going to set our initiatives from the start? What is the end goal we're looking to achieve from this? How are we trying to accomplish the demands of our patrons and deliver on some of the promises of this? What does it look like? Where do those investments sit? And that was one of the major challenges. We're not exactly sure what were the investments going to be and where the resources were going to come from, because we felt we couldn't do everything we'd always done in the same way and still do all these new things at the same time. There was going to have to be trade-offs. There were going to have to be changes. And that got to that central point of what was changing and what might have to change in the future as we thought about the library. I think that the way it was summed up very well by one library dean, we're talking about this, that we're sort of sitting in two worlds. We're on the cusp of two different worlds at the same time. So we have the traditional library that's unbundling, the traditional services, the traditional requests, the things that people would always rely on or expected from a library are in decline, whether it's circulation or reference or traditional requests. While all of these digital services, though not at full maturity, are certainly starting to take off. Students and faculty and patrons are starting to demand much more of our digital footprint and access to digital information, digital books, and digital services. And we have not invested completely in that yet. We're sitting between these two worlds, figuring out which canoe we should be in. It's the foot in two canoes strategy. We're going down the river with a foot in both canoes, and we're not exactly sure which one's going to sink and which one's not. That was the most interesting quote I think I got. There's a lot of interesting quotes in the possible, but I thought that was very interesting. Which do you invest in? Where do you steal? What we're going to talk about in the rest of the time are some of the areas where we've seen people change, where we've seen these things take place. And again, we talked a lot about books, journals, space, and staff as those four main areas. So we see the change happening, and we've seen some practices put into place about what this means for our lives. But I would love to pull up here and hear from you all. As we've laid out this scenario, this is what I heard in the course of this research. This is what we were told from individuals in the library about what they saw as the challenges of what the future might hold, and what we need to think about. When you think about these conversations here at Iowa State, as you've had them or as you're continuing to have them, are there pieces of this that stand out in particular? Are there pieces that we missed in trying to put this together as well that you would add to this conversation? One of my favorites, and I said this earlier in the morning, say no. I love when people say no. Right? I love when people completely disagree and have a thoughtful response as to why they completely disagree. So if you can tell me no and argue that, I would love to hear that probably more than anything else.
Well, my biggest concern is that my profession is completely unrepresented in the report and in the survey. I went to fill it out, and there was literally not a single question that touched on what I do, which is preservation.
Okay.
And I think there was only one question that touched on special collections. And I mean, I definitely appreciate all of this, and I agree a lot with it, but it just completely fails to mention the unique and rare collections that you find in special collections and archives.
And the local.
Yeah, yeah. At a previous institution I worked at, which I cannot name because I signed a confidentiality agreement, they refused to send a lot of their rare materials to the Google Books project, even though they were a Google Books institution, because they found the materials were coming back damaged. And they said, this is just not a worthwhile risk.
Sure.
We'll take care of digitizing these materials ourselves. And in preservation, originally, I think a lot of conservators thought digitization was fantastic because we thought, oh, we'll digitize things and give people access to that. And then that's like a preservation measure because those original unique materials will be useless. Well, we've actually found exactly the opposite is true. People see things online and they get excited to know and have them, and then they want to come in and see it in person because that digital capture isn't quite the same as looking at the original or whatever. But so in all this about, you know, traditional library functions going away, or, you know, those traditional library purposes, I mean, I think we can all agree that it is not best practice to just digitize your rare materials and then throw the originals away, right? Like, if we had done that when it was microfilming in the 80s, we'd be in a lot of trouble right now. So, I would really like to see special collections functions and preservation added into this conversation, because I don't think we're obsolete yet.
I don't think you're absolutely at all. I think with every project review, there's a scope that we have to put on it in terms of what we're going to talk about. Special collections actually came up in conversations a lot. People really value the special collections they have. At the same time, we got interesting pushback from even librarians and deans and others about the special collection, and we want to have better access to it because we see this as a valuable resource, and we're continuing to resource it and maintain it and make sure that it is a great resource. But we want more people to know about it and use it, even if it means physically coming and using it. How do we do that? That was a big challenge that came up a lot. And digitization is not always the answer. You're quite right. We did have a couple of examples of special collections that were digitized, that were, you know, World War II collections that were very special, that had something of a market share that people saw a huge demand for using the digital function. But others say we have a great special collection that was donated as a part of the founder of the institution, but we don't necessarily see a great market capital or market demand for this, but we're going to hold on to it no matter what. That was beneficial. And you even say, when I was doing research in grad school, I would always go and find the digital pieces of a given text that was original. I was doing work on romantic and transcendental authors, the Cambridge era. And they had the original journals of these authors and poets, and you could go look at them. And I found them digitally, and I could look at the scans and I could read through it, but I went to the library and I was like, I want to see the originals of this. Just because it's so fascinating to me to go see that there was value. You're certainly right. Given the scope and time, we had that sort of putting the windows and the frames on it. So very good. Yeah.
So I'm a doctoral student, and I'm researching information on the instruction of community colleges. And one thing that I have found in more than one community college here in Iowa, they're talking to their students about ebooks. The last school I went to, the librarian does an informal poll in the class who would actually use ebooks. And he says only about 30% of his students actually say they would use ebooks. And these are traditional age freshman and sophomore students that still are not using ebooks, even if it would be in the topic.
That comes up a lot too. The question, will students use this or will they still rely on traditional paper and books and normal physical resources that are there? There's a feeling that sometimes people don't know if they would use them or not. And so they would respond that I would prefer to have the physical resources because I'm comfortable with it. And I haven't moved myself into a digital use and a digital access to information. There's also another push that we got from a lot saying, we see the students coming out of K-12, and the much younger students now who are starting to be much more ingrained in technology than we had ever seen before, even students in college now, that are just born digital natives. They're going to expect much more that they can access on their smartphone or their tablet. They're going to be used to reading and using that as a resource. That's at least the pushback we got in that same question as well. But I think a good point. There's still a general response from students that, oh, I like my books. I like the approach that I take. I like to write things down and understand.
Yeah. To follow up on Melissa's point, I think that I'm glad you made the point that there's a scope to this particular research and so on, and it's looking at the stressors and the changes that are necessary in order to survive. But I think there's been a lot of conversations in the Association of Research Libraries about the differentiating factor of unique special collections in terms of providing that research infrastructure. So that it's not overlooked or undervalued, it just was not in this. So that there are the enduring values and the enduring resources and services. This is looking at change in order to address all areas of stressors and change.
Other thoughts on these, or on the change themselves, or how you've seen some of these? Yeah, please.
What I haven't really heard is the philosophical change.
Okay.
So you talked about the big evil companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, whatever.
Oh, I don't think they're evil.
Oh, I think they're evil. It is a philosophical change. So from my more traditional library studies background, we have always been pillars of privacy, anonymity. We're afraid of the Patriot Act. We always separate our circulation records from the patron, reference questions from the patron. All of that goes away. We're afraid of NSA or FBI coming down from our island. Those companies will just hand them over. They gather data, they mine data, they know exactly what you've been searching, what you've been doing, they pop up ads, and I'm like, wow, how do you do that? You know, libraries can be like, hey, when
when you notice we were talking on Zappos, we have books on Teams. Is that really what we want to be doing? And maybe it's with millennials, they are good with putting all that information out there. I'm not. So is there a philosophical change, a shift that has to happen with how we approach these new services?
I think so. I'd love to toss that out to the group as well. I think it's very cool. Very cool. I don't think those corporations, I don't think people are evil. Generally, I'm not a cynic, so I don't think people are evil at heart. Now, they might have evil things that take place and things go on that are questionable of how it actually turns out. But I do love the point you make of, Google or Amazon or Netflix or even a lot of these that are going after and they give away a lot of stuff for free. Right? Google gives away a ton of stuff for free in the hope that they'll collect all your information and sell that afterwards. That's the genuine business model in a lot of ways to think about. It's important. At the end of the day, their shareholders are going to ask them, how am I getting a return on my investment? Yeah, I would love to talk to that as a group. That's a great philosophical question that I would love to spend time with.
I think as millennials get older, they realize they shouldn't have as much on Facebook as they do.
We did a study last year.
Eventually, they will get tired of feeling like everything they do is being tracked. I think it's just an aging process or a maturing process.
We did a study last year from our Student Affairs Forum about digital identity for college students and make them a little bit more aware about the imprint they have when they put out all that information on social media and on all those networks. One of the more fascinating studies we've done, we'll send it out to everybody to read because it is fascinating when you think about all that information that's out there.
Well, I was just going to say, as a millennial, I would hesitate to just blame this on a generational gap. After all, it was not the millennials who created Google and Amazon. I can't blame the older generation for that. But I do think it's some case of willingness to share some things. And I mean, what some of these companies have done, right, is to gray that line of like, you can share up to a point, and then after that, we're going to use some of the things that you're sharing for reasons that you may not be comfortable with. But I think also some of these things that the big corporations have done, and while I do not especially believe in capitalism, I think one of the things that they've been able to push libraries to do is to rethink some of our services and actually bring them up to speed with now what people are expecting. I mean, if we were still only using print journals and the other alternatives are out there, like Wikipedia, I mean, we would be battling an uphill battle every day. So I think in some points it's driven people who are critical of capitalism and of capitalist pursuits to be more creative in what we do within the building.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about previous slides. And one was, you said that journals were crowding out books. And I didn't see the evidence in the slide.
Journals crowding out books.
Yeah, it was, you had journal costs relative to books. There it is.
Journal costs crowding out books.
But are library budgets going up?
In terms of the actual resources going to the library itself as a whole?
Right. Because you may have books, just not
Depending on the
as
institution.
much material costs going up, but that doesn't mean it's crowding out. And there might have been indications for purchasing articles and getting back issues or having that issues.
Sure. I think in general, from what we heard and what we still have seen is that very few library budgets are continuing to rise at a great clip. There's been a lot of moratoriums in terms of budget increases at a lot of different institutions. So it's still, journal costs continue to rise. And if we continue to put our resources that are limited and are not increasing towards those ever-increasing costs, it's more of we don't necessarily have the resources to put towards other things that we might want.
So is that the inference you made from the numbers, or were they telling you that, we're getting material costs, and so there's no way we can buy as many books as we want?
That was what we heard in the anecdotes and conversations. Okay.
My other question was about the, going to search engine for undergraduates.
Yep.
Look at first. So is there anything that you know about that's been done if somebody's had an information literacy class or research methods class? Does their behavior change after that?
That came up actually this morning as well when we thought about this, and that's something I'm going to jump up here some of the stuff. Is that same question of how do you track long-term the impacts of, say, an information literacy class, or the impact of a college education as a whole? There's all those things that we always want to track in higher education for colleges and universities in terms of outcomes that are very qualitative in nature. And this goes very much theoretically to the value of a college degree as a whole. People say there's a lifetime value to the experience you have in college, the developmental process, the learning process, the critical thinking process, everything else that goes into this that is just almost impossible to quantify and almost impossible to track longitudinally or long term. So though we hear anecdotally that we think there's an impact from those information literacy classes, and we see students either using library resources better or taking these classes early on in their academic careers and then having that carry through, I have not seen a great data set or study that shows that and can give a real good answer to that question. It's more anecdotal in the thought process.
Just 2 points. The Iowa State actually is unusual, I think, in the ARL family to have actually preserved and maintained a significant amount of money for monographs. Many places, it's a journal that ate the library. All the money's moved to serials. So that's a local experience, which I think is a good way to go. The other thing is, and of course I just finished teaching in the summer, some of the students were looking at some of these articles. There are a lot of very flawed articles out there about proving the impact of information literacy. Not that information literacy doesn't have an impact, but the article research methodology is not robust. So the students have great fun tearing them apart. But we want to believe it makes a difference, and that may skew how we frame our research. But there is a need to have research on that.
Sure. It goes to, I think, as well, we do a lot of research on learning outcomes, on faculty impact as a whole, and what students are learning in the classroom, how that carries through. It's, again, very difficult to quantify, very difficult to study. What the results are from one faculty member in a classroom and what those outcomes are going to be versus all those things. It's not tracked really well. It's not studied all that well either. And there's a lot of questions about it because we go back to the questions of accountability and the metrics you're being measured against and the quality of a library. All those questions about the quality of instruction, the quality of teaching and learning at an institution that we don't always have the greatest answers for. There's a lot of complexities that we'll say in higher education go behind that and go to the learning process and the outcomes and the long-term vocational or career impacts of what the college experience looks like. But it's not tracked really well. There's not a great answer for that. But we see a lot more pushback from parents, from students, from families, from governments, state and federal, asking more for those questions and more for those answers, trying to find out. Yeah, please.
This slide I find a little bit haunting. Just because you can't, I don't know, there has to be a balance in libraries, I think, between the traditional and the digital services. I work in special collections, and people will come in and ask for things, and when I point to online exhibits or online materials, it's clear to me, and that's a biased opinion, obviously, but it's clear to me that they wouldn't have been able to find them on their own on the internet. And that's an information literacy problem, perhaps, and I know that I'm spectacular finding things on the internet. But the actual physical materials behind that exhibit are still, they need to be available. When I answer reference questions, our students may not use the collections, or will only use the things that I point them to, but I still need at least some of those physical materials to be able to do my job adequately. And yes, maybe that's, we could improve our website and improve how we point people to our online materials, but that can only go so far, I think, in helping people use library resources. So the idea of having a foot in each canoe and which one will sink first, I think, is a bad one for me. We're going to go whitewater rafting, and maybe there's some rapids we have to navigate. But I would like there to be a single ship that uses both of those things in ways that are adequate and efficient for everyone.
A pontoon.
Pontoon boat.
Pontoon boat.
Yeah, but a bridge between the two.
That's not exciting enough for me.
Well, I think you're right, that if you have the two extremes, it's not the right answer, because you're not going to do just one extreme and completely forego the other. Within every piece of this, the real answer is it's a spectrum of what you're going to do that you've always done traditionally and what new things you would do. The bigger question is, how do you determine what those new things are going to be? How do you resource adequately to those new things, and what resources do you shift? Because it's not that we have an influx of money that we can do all these new things. It's that there have to be trade-offs. There have to be decisions made about what is going to be moved, what's going to be done and not.
This is kind of a little bit out of there when you're looking at this kind of a model. Sounds kind of odd, but I've just seen some of the latest research on like sleep studies, and they're noticing more and more children, as they get on the electronics, they're reading their iPads, whatever, are developing insomnia. And now they're starting to say when they're looking at these backlit things, the blue lights, or like the Nook readers and things that have the lights, they're finding out that as that passes through the eyes, it is affecting the brain, and they're starting to tell parents, and I thought this was really interesting, having grandkids with them, that you better put them down by 6 o'clock because it disrupts sleep pattern. And there's one thing they didn't think about. Kids always read in bed. And so if we start going to all this, I mean, is there a point where maybe there's some health things that are going to start backfiring on us if we go to all this digital stuff and we don't know what the effect of,
Sure.
I mean, it just seems like an odd.
And it's interesting additional variable to throw in there.
Well, yeah,
But I'm no expert on sleep studies or anything about the.
It's just started coming to a head more and more, and they're pointing it out at some of the schools, and I was like, wow, I have it all the time, but that's one of the first things they tell you is, do you have an electronic device? You need to put them down at 6 o'clock if you want to go to bed by 10. They're not.
I was never a kid to read in bed. I don't know. Maybe I was a bad kid. I don't know. Yeah.
There's kind of, we're investing a lot in digital. So we're doing our replacement for our traditional facilities, and they don't have a long history with us. We're making assumptions about the longevity of our access to which they don't really can test for it.
Sure.
That is something to be concerned about.
Yeah. I agree, and I always push back on that too. Whenever we get asked about this last time, or these are new things that happen, and certainly there are a bleeding edge that nobody wants to be on. You certainly don't want to invest in technologies that are not going to see a long-term benefit that we're going to use as an institution. At the same time, we hear the argument of, well, we also don't want to be left behind either. So we find, again, what is the balance of how do you do those together? How do you find out what that looks like? And I don't think there's always right answer. Some people will invest heavily in some of those new technologies that fizzle out, but they don't turn them to be very hot.
So, I have a non-statistically valid personal anecdote that I think is depressing and relevant, which is that I'm new here, but in my previous position, I taught library school students, people who wanted to become librarians. And in more than one class, I got students who were very resentful of trying to go through the library databases. They wanted me to scan documents and stick them in the board management software. And I tried to explain to them, let's go through the library. We'll give them circulation counts. I'm not going to scan things for you. That is a violation of copyright, but this is your future librarians who were very resentful of having to use the library. So that really concerned me. It wasn't part of my curriculum plan. I had to say, well, look at measures out of how it says. But no, that was a learning opportunity for us to discuss how library databases work. But I think that's something that I would take away from that is that, again, these are just master's library standards. They're very specific, but the takeaway I would take is that they wanted it all to be seamless to them. They resented clicking on the button and wanted to proxy server, even though that was like, and they had a purpose to do that. They were very resentful of that. So, not everyone, clearly. I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush. It's just, it was noticeable in more than one class.
Take a few more comments or two, and then we'll move on a little bit.
Well, just kind of to relate that, I think you answered the question, but was that more of a convenience thing, or was it more of a, I just want to use an interface? Because I think that's
convenience.
Yeah, and I think that's, the expectation our consumer has, because I realize, I use user education, but really they're consumers, and the consumer mindset is, it needs to be as easy for me as is possible. And I think that's part of it, where I think, we have, back to this migration thing, we have people who, even though we have people who want to print, and even though, they like the ease of access, sometimes they don't want it all the time, and it's a convenience thing. Do I have to go to the library? Do I have to use the library database? I want it here. I want it now. And I think that's, and that's what we have to respond to. But it's just interesting, though, that it's like, but it's one click, but that was enough.
Well, part of it was they had spotty internet access space, and the people were very real, and they just wanted not have to do those.
Right, to another hoop.
So one of the four horsemen you showed was space being used for different purposes. And maybe that's something you're going to get to. I guess one thing, I've only been here for a little over a year. One thing that amazes me is every time I'm in the library, it seems to be packed with students. And if you're in retail, if you're in business, what you always want is you want traffic flow. There's definitely traffic flow here. Question for business often is how do you monetize that traffic flow? So you've got the flow here. Why are they coming here then? Why do they come to libraries? And isn't there some way to set up a strategy that involves taking better advantage of that traffic?
Such as?
you've got all the resources right here, you've got the people right here. Surely there's a way to tap into them. Maybe you plug something into their brains when they come in to get around that light thing and tap them right into the library. I'm not sure. It's a question, you seem to suggest a fourth horseman it was bad having traffic. I would think traffic would be good, and traffic's here.
No, certainly the space issue when we talk about it is not saying that having students and having patrons in the library is bad. It's certainly the opposite. Right? You want them in the space for a variety of reasons. This is a great collaborative space, a great study space, a great learning space. The issue that we see, and you obviously don't see that here even on the first floor when you walk through, you have lots of students and you have students doing all the great work that you see here. It's that when, in the process of this research, we saw a lot of libraries, this is not one of them per se, that had so many physical volumes in the space of the library that you were crowding out the ability of students and others to come into the library and use the space. That's the space challenge that we heard from users, that the physical volumes that aren't necessarily circulating and people aren't necessarily using when we track them are actually taking up the space that we could see being used better for our patrons. And it's moving away from, we've heard the comment, a library as a warehouse for books and a warehouse for storage to this collaborative learning academic conference hall. That's more. All right, so I know
Well, I just think the point David raised, maybe monetize not in the sense of dollars, but monetize in terms of having students, supporters and advocates and for the library and being involved in the change of the library. Because you're right, it's full. It's the communal spaces, social spaces, and also academic space.
I apologize for being crassly capitalist.
No, but I think we
But
need to take advantage of, we need to get the value add from the fact that there are thousands of students in the library.
We can do a point of service. I don't, that's what I want, but you could, if they're up on tier 7 and have a problem and they can notify somebody there's an information problem, and we can go to them instead of them coming to us, I think is one way to think of monetizing.
I think what David was saying, how can we profit by this?
They're here, so how do you get
Let's
them?
take advantage of
Get them more of your services, because they're here anyway.
So maybe we can go to the student societies and get.
Yeah, it's not like you have to draw, it's not like you're having trouble getting them in the building. It's more a question, and I'm not a librarian, so I'm the dean of the College of Business. Hence the
that's where it comes
hence
from.
No, it's more about how do you get them then to engage with the other services that you're offering here?
And I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that maybe we don't have to be tied to the first floor. Maybe our services need to be fused somehow, so that it's where they need it, when they need it, not coming down to the first floor to say, I can't find this information, I'm researching on tier 7, I need something in cooking and more nutritional information about cooking, but yet I have to come downstairs to ask that question.
You have chat reference.
Well, but can we tell them in tier 7
We need
that
a
there is
mobile
chat?
app, folks.
And most students have it, and a lot of students are in the library when they ask that chat
Right,
reference.
but there's no direction. There's no direction, so maybe we do that app, I guess I'm sure.
Let's do that.
It sort of reminds me of like when you're at a Target and you need help and you press the button.
Yes.
Is that-
That's what I'm trying to get at, thank you.
Let's do this, because I want to be respectful of your time, and I promise I always am accountable to the time of the clock, and I don't ever want to stop discussion though either, because that was the whole point of this session, was to start discussion about what is going on in the library, and be something that takes away from this. And that was my goal, rather than, I always build slides in case, say all of you were silent for 90 minutes, well, at least I would have something to talk about. But you're not, you all talked about this, so I don't intend to go through books, journals, space, and staff. But let's just talk about, because this has come up in the end, the sort of space issues and a little bit of the staffing questions of how you go where students are. Because that's what's really come up here, and that's what we heard in the process of this, and thinking about going where the students are and reaching out and giving them some additional information. On the space side, and I'll just give the quick overview, is that thing that we mentioned, that space was a premium, especially in the library. That it's not about just the physical volumes, that this was something that was going to be different, collaborative, and learning content. That was the model that people wanted to move towards. But the challenges associated with that are, of course, related to the lack of technical resources that we sometimes have, of course, the deselection of books, and often the renovation costs of the library as well. But you can't just move everything out when the physical volumes are there and expect that the space will magically be collaborative and magically be where everybody goes. There is a resource cost. There's something that goes into this. But what you get to is a couple of different models. This is the one that I pull up here from actually a community college. This is Lorain County Community College, where they've partnered with the local community to develop not only a library and a learning commons for the college itself, but also a public library for the local community. You now have a space that is open to everybody to provide access to information. This is one of literally dozens, hundreds of different learning commons models that we've started to uncover. But the basic models of it are basically the things you see over on the right-hand side, that you have fewer physical resources within the space. It's designed to be comfortable, it's designed for collaboration. It's couches, it's movable chairs and tables and things that can move over time. It's a lot of group study spaces and group study rooms and things that can be designed around socialization. But at the same time, it's very modular in nature, meaning we don't design space that's going to be the way it is right now, right? We don't know what the demands of that space are going to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years. We need to make it something that can develop over time, that can be modularly moved throughout this. Of course, there's the issues of connectivity, outlet access, where you have to have the ability to plug in all your devices, as well as have wireless internet connectivity for all of them. When I was walking over here, we were talking about the amount of devices that people have, and I realized, well, I'm carrying around 3 devices myself right now. I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, I have a PC, I'm carrying around all of that. And expecting when I go, I'm going to have access on all of those things to go to pull information, do email or get things. So that's what we're really seeing in this. As we mentioned, the heart of the institution, the integration of academic support services, which gets to a little bit of going where the students are providing them with that academic support when they need it in that space. This is a Target or a Walmart model in the sense that everything is under one roof. The students can go and they can get access to information, access to those supports. And of course, the food and drink approach. You have the cafe model. We talked about this earlier, but this always comes up, is are we just turning a library into a giant Starbucks? Right? We have a cafe and coffee, you can go be social and collaborative, you can have wireless connection, you can plug in. Well, and some people say, yeah, we are like a giant Starbucks with better academic resources. And better
Like borders.
In some ways, yeah. That kind of model of the space itself. On the staffing front, though, and we heard a lot of people saying, what is it that librarians do, or what is that transition model? Thinking about the traditional services of circulation or cataloging or reference, and some of the new things that we could do to work with students more closely. Think about what that would start to look like. And I go to one case we've already mentioned, is that information literacy question. Integrating information literacy into the curriculum, into helping students understand what is Wikipedia. If that's the second place you're going to go look for start to research, maybe you should understand why and how it's curated. And what is that information? It's built into the classroom in some cases and built into the library of having students curate Wikipedia themselves as a part of their academic endeavors and a part of their classes. They change around that model. Or Google is always a great one. We've already mentioned it so many times. Let's understand the magic of that search engine. Let's understand why there are the top 10 page rankings or why things come up on Google as opposed to others. Because maybe those aren't the best results. But of course, we've run into the question of, well, students don't think they need support anymore, right? They think that they know everything because they can search and they can find it on Google. It's a question of getting beyond that, to say, well, let's understand the research process. Let's understand the search process of some of these engines and have that to carry us through and build that into the classroom, but also the library, and to integrate some of that. And the other one I'll mention here is the issue of actually embedding librarians into classes. We start to see a lot of institutions moving in this direction. This is again from a community college. This is Bucks County Community College, that have what they call embedded librarians in every one of their introductory general ed courses and general foundational courses where they started. Where in the learning management system, within the chat function, within the discussions, within the course roster, the librarian is a part of all of that. They are a resource to go through throughout the entire course for the entire semester. If you need information about the library, for every assignment that you have, that librarian actually works with the faculty to develop assignments and provide the resources, help them understand how to go do some of the research, provide the answers to some of these. You're basically building faculty members into the classroom, into the teaching and learning of the institution. It gets to that accountability metric of how are we contributing to teaching and learning? How is that a part of faculty research? How does that relationship start to take place? And they create library guides for every class, every different section of their classes. It shows you the library resources that are most useful in this class, things that will link to certain assignments within that class as well. Information about citations, you have a direct connection to that librarian, how to ask the librarian. There's even social media connections to that librarian, or Skype, you can do video chat with them as well. So all this built into the classroom, into the learning management platform that students interact with the class. And so we also go where the students are. In that same sense that we know students are on YouTube, we know they're using iTunes U, they're using these other resources. They create library guides and short video messages of saying a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes that go over certain aspects of the library or the research process. You can go and have students be as a part of the classroom activities, where the content's accessed outside the class, but helping them get more information about it. You start to see those lines come together. And the last one I'd like to jump to, because this has come up, is that mobile application that we started to see librarians and libraries develop. And one we call out here, this is NC State. And they have a full mobile app. This is not a responsive design website. This is a full mobile app designed for the library, which has information on, you can search the catalog, you can locate available computers within the library space, find out where they are. You can look at workspace. You can actually go on and find out what group rooms are available, and you can sign them out through the app that you have there. You can do real-time chat through the app with librarians if you have questions about that. You can do in that absolute moment. Of course, as the library, the different locations. And NC State had one of the most interesting things I've seen on a mobile app for libraries, which is this last point down here, if you can see this. This is the live webcam outside of the coffee shop. that you can access from the mobile app. Meaning if you wanted to see how long the line was to get a cup of coffee, you can pull up that app and actually go access it and figure out if this is the time I want to leave my space or I want to leave till later. Now the other thing that we've seen from mobile apps and from swipe card readers and other things is institutions using technology to help with student success. And we want to know, are students going to the library? Are they participating in different group activities? Are they using the mobile app to actually check in when they go to the library or do a specific activity of research in the library? We've actually seen the University of Kentucky is one, several others who start to use mobile technology to use that as indicators of success for different students. This is very interesting. Again, big data, so you're collecting students' data about where they are and what they're doing, but using it to say, well, if we have a student who didn't attend the library orientation and has not been to the library or swiped in, they haven't checked out any books or done any research requests, we know that they probably should be. We want to intervene and figure out why is that the case. Because that student might be off track academically, and now they could be a student success question for the institution. So you're using that as a new way of intervention to help students be a little bit more successful in the classroom. I'll round out today just with this last piece, a thought experiment, a thought piece for this, is what would you do if you could start from scratch? This is UC Merced. This is a new research institution of the UC system that had the opportunity to literally start a library from scratch. What they did is what you see basically here on this slide. They had a smaller physical collection, 93,000 print books and a lot of digital books and digital journals, but they had access through the actual library system of all the other UC libraries, providing access to all the materials they might be looking for there. So that was a good piece of how they had a minimal physical collection. A lot of what they did is through patron-driven acquisition, meaning it's done through ebooks. When someone accesses a piece of material, that's the only time it is purchased. Nothing is bought in advance and then held just in case someone uses it, but they do a lot of the patron-driven approaches to this. They outsource tech services. Cataloging and other services are totally outsourced, so that's not done within the library. They have a virtual reference desk. There is no reference desk anymore. Everything is done through Skype and through chat and through email, where you have 24/7 access to reference resources. But it's all done in hosted technology, through technology. And the last one is they have automated circulation. They put radio frequency ID tags in every single book, and all of the checkouts are done through machines in the lobby of the library. There's no physical person that actually does the book checkouts. Now again, this is just an example of what you might do from scratch. Even UC Merced has developed from where they were when they started this, with more staff actually, and other resources that are available there. But the thought is, if you started from scratch, if you didn't have any resources, you didn't have anything built available, what would it look like? What would the new library model start to be and start to look like in an institution? Thought experiment, not saying that this is the right model or this is what everybody's doing. People start to ask these questions and think a little bit more about them. Yeah.
And how easy is this to do when you don't have the entire UC network behind you? None of the other lesser UCs were supposed to be research libraries. They're supposed to rely on Berkeley and UCLA. That's why they have all the band systems, the ILL, all built in from UCs. Can Iowa State suddenly do this without that sort of support?
That's a good question. Maybe. This is, again, thought experiment. I'm not saying this is the model. I'm not saying that you could all do this or anybody could do this. But it's what would you do? What would be the model?
I don't see anything there about instruction.
There's not for this example. That goes into that piece. They develop more of that over time, though. I have to do, again, a little bit of follow-up. We talked to them a little bit after they first developed the library and realized the changes they need, the staff that they needed to be better services for students and patients. But I don't know about the instruction. Yeah.
Has undergraduate success been tracked or has it found things work for that model for undergraduate success?
For UC Merced?
Yeah, have they seen that undergraduates, yeah, they're really getting the education, they're using these resources and
I don't know.
much better off.
I don't know. Yeah, good question. And how do you track that? How do you track that here? Right? If I were to ask you all, what's the undergraduate success related to the library? Do you have a way to answer that?
And it's hard to compare old and new because paradigms are almost, in some ways, incommensurable. And so you can't trace that thing.
Oh, exactly.
But if that's the case, then you do have some problems. In an area like this, you have to, I think the question might come down to organizational flexibility and willingness to change. And being able to develop different communities within the library and across disciplines, along with other graduates, developing their own communities and learning from it.
All right, so I know we're just at about time. We do have a full study on the academic library that you all have access to. I'm not going to read through every piece of this, but if you go on to EAB.com, you have access to all of the research we've ever done on pretty much any topic, not just library related, but across higher education. You just have to use your Iowa State email address to log in there. You use that as your sort of username, and then you can create a password in about 10 seconds and go on and search the entire library if you are actually interested in that. It's my plug, we did a little bit of plug earlier. That's mine for you all, but this is a resource you have at your disposal. Would love to have you go and use it. Additionally, I put my contact information up there. If you have questions after this session, you go and search the library and need a little bit of help or have anything additional you'd like to follow up on or walk through some of the cases that we have in there, please reach out to me, shoot me an email, or give me a call. Happy to do it. Ashley as well, I can be in touch with her as the main advisor for Iowa State. We can also be in touch with you all. But other than that, I'd like to answer additional questions, but just want to thank you all for your time, as well as for the commentary, the discussion. Really a great session this afternoon, so thank you all very much for your time.
Well, like I said, Matt does have some limited time for questions. He has like 20 to 5. But I want to give you all gold stars for the afternoon because you were far more interactive than the morning group. So that's good.
Boring
One of the things that I want to remind you about is that this is sort of a first step in a larger discussion about where we go and what we do as a library. And we'll be sending out some more information about that later. We will get copies of the report and everything else, the slides from today. We've got video that will be going up on the internet that will be available for you to look at if you want to review things, or if you know someone that wasn't here that's interested in seeing this. And I want to thank Matt and Ashley for their willingness to come out here. I know Matt told me that he was in New Brunswick. He came here from New Brunswick, so he's looking forward to going home. But thank you all for attending. So.